All right. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Michelle, and I'm going to interview Michelle as a part of this ongoing evolutionary astrology interview series. Um, Most of the teachers that will be speaking at the upcoming EA conference were sharing interviews. So this is a very exciting and joyful opportunity for me. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Ari.
Before we get into your personal history and journey with EA and your role in this conference, which I definitely want to speak to, the first question I want to ask right now, what you can think about is what topic or realm of teachings within evolutionary astrology is most alive and
Mm,
engaging to? Like, what are you drawn to? What are you learning and thinking about and discovering right now?
Thanks for that question. I recently discovered this increasing just like passion around the understanding that can come from Jeffrey Wolfe Green's original teachings on aspects and phases. And a part of this came from researching the talk, Soulmates and Karma Mates. And in the Pluto 2 book, he goes into the phasal relationship between Venus and Mars, which is really just incredibly fascinating to me. But then I started to really discover and pinpoint and look at what he was speaking to when he's speaking to the phase of the opposition and apply that to how the lens of what I'm looking at the present moment charts when we're looking at, let's say, the full moon or the new moon. Today was the new moon in Virgo. And so I really dived into the new phase conjunction, 0 degrees, right? And there's something so incredible about the simultaneity of phasal relationships, both in the natal chart and by transit. We have so many different cycles that are unfolding within our lives. And if we think of ourselves as an evolutionary being, that there are different parts of us that are coming with specific intentions. And a part of what really inspired this is that Jeffrey Wolfe Green refers to the opposition as a bridge. And then he speaks to sort of the evolutionary necessity of how we cross that bridge, right? So if you're someone with an opposition in your natal chart, whether it's between, Pluto and Chiron, like there's many people in the Pluto and Virgo generation who have Pluto Chiron as an opposition, or if you have, a sun moon opposition in your natal chart, relative to what that planet is, there is an evolutionary function with those houses and that phase and that aspect that is informing a particular strength, a gift, a necessity, a challenge that you're looking at with that particular soul. And as I've been I've learned aspects and phases many, many times, including in your full year training program. But for whatever reason, as I've been diving into the karmic relationships and the composite chart between synastry between two people, the reality of how aspects and phases in that respect illuminates the dance of relationship and what we're doing together. Why are we doing that together? What are we here to learn together? What's the challenge? What's the bridge that our relationship, if we were looking at our relationship from a composite perspective, right? We have various different aspects and phases between our Venus and Mars, our moon, our sun and moon in our composite chart, as our relationship unfolds, I am beginning to see and get more and more like context for how the different evolutionary intentions relate to each part. And so for me, this is exciting. It's fascinating. It's like I can totally feel myself, revving up the desire that I have to really understand this, to teach this, to share this, and to help people really come into some like interwoven relational pieces that can allow us to go, oh yeah, okay, that's why that piece where we keep butting heads in that little spot, or that's where that piece where it's sweet and it's like we're more developed in that phase of our relationship, or that's why that piece feels like such a strong impulse. Like all of that gives me hope to how people might be able to work with this in their own relationships and in their own dynamics to really like, oh, I understand that. Now I understand the evolutionary intention behind that in our chart, or, in your own chart. I can see there's so many different layers of this.
Cool. All right. So for those who aren't familiar with phases, 8 phases, and basically all aspects manifest within a phase, right? What I love about your expressing is just the wisdom, the nuance of working with phases as speaking to complete phases of evolutionary development.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that really gives perspective for what are we working with right now. So you're bringing that also into composite work or synastry work between two souls. And you start off with the opposition. So one thing that I think is cool within the EA work is an opposition isn't an opposition, right? Is it a gibbous phase opposition? Is it before the exact opposition, or is it after the exact opposition? Do you want to speak a little bit to that as you're learning it and exploring it?
Yeah, I found that actually really one of the most fascinating pieces, and it kind of sent me down the rabbit hole of the aspects and phases. There's something about when we're growing in evolutionary awareness, in whatever, there becomes, as a part of the whole process, you could almost see from new moon, new phase conjunction, right? Building semi-sextile, right? And then into first quarter square, right? Into the opposition, the gibbous phase, or, and then full phase. There's a trajectory that each energetic, relational, progressive dynamic has to naturally build upon itself.
And it has to be in that order.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can't really, oh my gosh. It's funny because one of my relationship coaches, she was saying to me about, something I was really struggling with in our relationship. She was saying to me, Michelle, you can't skip steps, right? And the whole idea of a skip step is a very common phrase of terminology in evolutionary astrology. And it prompted me to really think about this whole movement towards the full phase opposition as being the sequential steps of evolutionary energy that are each feeding one into the next, right? One, if we could call it awareness or consciousness or whatever, our behaviors, our actions, or our desires, right? Our desires are going to consciously evolve with that. And there isn't a way necessarily for us, let's say from an evolutionary perspective, to be in the consciousness of a full phase opposition when we're in the stage of a new phase conjunction, right? So that it doesn't, it sort of gives a lot of peace of mind and a little bit of recognition. Oh, okay, this is where I am. In the same way, you can't really force a baby to be a teenager, nor can you expect a toddler to be an adult, right? Their natural development, you can actually instead meet the developmental or the evolutionary process of the child with excitement, with joy, with curiosity. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at they did, and sometimes those phases might display the energy or the momentum of a later phase. Just like I think there are elements in in the gibbous phase or even in the last quarter phase that are going to have some of that momentum, kind of like the way a toddler might walk up to you and say, like, I really want this, you can go get it for me. And it sounds very adult, right? It sounds very clear and directive, but it's actually coming from a 3-year-old. And it's not an adult's desires or an adult's level of maturity. So I've been really enjoying both coming to understand more of how we can meet our own level of development, because I feel like this is so mirrored in the chart. Like I know in evolutionary astrology, there's a lot of focus on the stages of evolution and the stages of, the consciousness that relates to those stages of evolution. But in a way, the phases, the planetary phases and the aspects are also illuminating sort of an undertone of that evolution within the soul's reality in terms of how they can work with what's happening in their lives and what they're doing. For some of us, we might meet the dark night of the soul experience, for example, as a deep spiritual initiation. And for another person, that experience could be such a break in consciousness that it feels like a nervous breakdown. And we might later in our life be able to look back at that phase of our development and say, oh, that was an awakening. Oh, that was a spiritual download. But at the time, it looked like a nervous breakdown to all of our friends or family, right?
That's a beautiful point.
Yeah.
Something that I learned just in working with the phases and looking at, the lived experience of them, it almost teaches me that there's a soul program, right? It really helps me understand that teaching of cooperation or resistance. And I think it's really empowering to come to a realization of the soul program that isn't about like, I'm not allowed to, I'm blocked, like my karma is such that I can't do these. That's not an empowered relationship. More of a wisdom. Like when we can actually find the wisdom of those phases through not a belief, but a direct understanding. We recognize, this is what I'm really working with. This is actually what's present for me right now. And what I find is there's more of a yielding ourselves to that reality and a sincere interest in wanting to understand what's the intention, what wants to be learned and realized right now. That's where the study of EA alongside living and learning from life is really helpful in both directions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it reminds me of a recent experience in a session with a client who came to me and they had a full phase opposition, Pluto, and part of what the inquiry was is like, I have always had repeated experiences of being hurt or wounded in relationship. Is this something where I am doomed to repeat the past, right? And it really prompted me to dive into that archetype of specifically of that opposition and the planets that were involved in the opposition on both sides, and what evolution is always pushing us towards, because we can often have a belief, especially with where, let's say, the soul is coming in and wanting through relationship to evolve. Through relationship. And in relationships, if we're repeating a particular pattern, right, there's kind of the idea of wherever you go, there you are. You can have a pattern in relationship and then feel like, okay, this person is triggering my pattern. We're doing this thing. So I'm going to end this relationship and I'm going to go get another relationship where I'm not having the pattern. But at some level, that evolutionary soul program, that the soul program is what inspired this thought, is going to repeat itself in manifestation until the evolutionary intention is recognized, worked with, and I think integrated, right? I think we can't just like see, oh, okay, that pattern, and then I take responsibility that I can't project that pattern upon you. I can't keep going into relationship also presuming that the past is going to repeat itself. That's one common experience that people have, or it brings the fear of past experiences and the repetition of past patterns in through the soul dynamic. And really what that does is it sets us up to work with that soul program again until there's a moment of clarity or reflection or evolution where the soul takes to, I think I've been really working with this relative to this Virgo cycle, at least at this time. What is it like to take 100% responsibility in relationship? And that would mean from the perspective of my soul program, or even from the perspective of our composite chart, that there is a relationship I have to that evolutionary intention. And that until I have met that and integrated that phase, it's going to keep, I'm going to like keep triggering it. You know, it's kind of like the story of the man who walks down the street and he falls into the hole. And then he walks down the street and he falls into the hole. And the next day he walks down the street and he falls in the hole. And he's kind of like upset and, you know, angry about why am I keep falling in this hole? And then he walks down the street and he falls in the hole. Now I'm making this up to paraphrase, but like he blames others for the hole being there. And then he walks down the street and he falls into the hole. And he gets really sick and tired of being in this hole. And then the next day he walks down the street and he walks around the hole. And then the next day he walks down a different street. And that's kind of that progression of evolution. Once we're getting beyond the repeated pattern of falling in the hole, and then the pattern of meeting that with resistance, right? We're still doing the same thing. Or then the pattern of meeting that resistance with blame or judgment or victimization. And then the pattern of meeting that with, I'm tired of this. This is the time to change. It's the time to change. This is now. And then meeting that with the evolutionary shift, which I think is a process. You can't actually skip the experience of falling in the hole and blaming others and being victimized. And like, maybe there are enlightened folks out there who have like quicker steps to actualization. But for me in my life, I have definitely had to repeat lessons, and it's been challenging. And karmically, emotionally, relationally, I have felt this deep responsibility to meet that in my own evolution. And I think that's a part of what has inspired me to do this talk to begin with.
Anything that we haven't met, any judgment, any anger, any fear, we're going to find a hole to fall in. Like, it's just like an inevitable like reality. We're going to match circumstantial, you know, experiences to whatever. And that's like the outer world exists in a sense for that purpose. You know, I just wanted to share that thought.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the, you know, the description of the Pluto work of resistance versus cooperation. I think resistance is actually kind of the more natural evolutionary stance. We more than likely, you know, if you've ever gotten a tattoo, when someone is, you know, inflicting pain, there's a tensing, right? You have to actually have a practice to relax, to
has to become a condition,
right?
Pattern. And that's where Jeff Green teaches, like, the bottom line is desire, which is like such a powerful, it's a thing to contemplate. It's like that desire is the bottom line, because that's really, we have to want to change. We have to want to relate to our experiences differently. Let's talk about your talk. You're going to be speaking about karma mates, soulmates, and drawing upon the teachings from the Pluto 2 book. Talk to us about your topic. And I already get a sense just from what you've shared. It's clear your passion and your draw to this topic. But speak more, like, why is this what you want to be teaching? And what are you, what's the gem of wisdom that you're really like drawing upon and exploring right now in this topic?
I think there's at least three different intentions that I hold, and that happens a lot for me. But one main core piece is, there's a lot of talk often about soulmates and soulmate relationships, or even twin flame relationships. And I think what I find so fascinating about Jeffrey Wolfe Green is he is very distinct and very different, and takes an incredibly unique lens upon which he focuses thoughts about relationships in general, but also the soulmate relationship and what he calls karma mates. It's so different from a lot of things that are out there. People come, I want to know, am I going to meet my soulmate? And am I going to have, and from the perspective of the soul, right? If we're talking about Pluto and the evolutionary journey and our desires and our desire to return to source, then when we're looking at relationships that are inspiring that desire, whether through karma or karmic entanglements, inspiring that evolution, right? And I'm going to be using an example of a relationship that is very fraught with,
like a well-known couple.
Celebrity couple that is fraught with relational dynamics. And that's also what happens to relationships when they convert to a spiritual purpose. And that's one of the main distinctions that he makes between soulmates and karma mates. When we're karmically, working out evolution, there's not always there isn't necessarily a shared intention to evolve together, to grow, right? But what happens in relationship when there is that shared spiritual commitment to evolution, souls have an opportunity to grow together and to evolve together. That doesn't necessarily make the evolutionary work more lovey-dovey and romantic. It might still actually be quite challenging. And there might be overlays of different phases of relationship and evolutionary work that has to be done in that relationship in order to really get to a place of spiritual growth that feels like we could call this, we're healed, we're healing together. But even that, the miracle to me of that shared intention of spiritual growth is, I think, one of the most important and fundamental reasons why I feel drawn to this work. And then I felt like, what better way to participate in this conference as an astrologer, as someone who's deeply committed to Jeffrey Wolfe Green and the Pluto teachings, but to unpack something that is actually very deep to my own heart. I mean, obviously we're on a journey of sorts, and an evolutionary journey together. And, my initiation into this work came with Pluto on my South Node, and Pluto on my Venus, Pluto square my Pluto. And I've further really, the further I've gotten into those transits, the more deeply I've considered Jeffrey Wolfe Green my primary teacher, even though you're one of a few very specific evolutionary astrologers who I've learned the most from. And you're probably one of the few people in my life where I've learned the most through relationship. I can say that for sure. There's something about immersing myself into teaching and sharing what he has to say about this, and through my own voice, but really giving a concise and supportive and integrative way of offering, this work to our community. And, I'm honored to be a part of this association. I'm honored to be able to actually find, I wasn't originally on the schedule. I'm administrating this conference and organizing everything. And it sort of came to me in meditation. This is something that I'm called to do. And the more I really am unpacking that in my own life, the more I'm seeing how his teachings, and in particular, how meaningful this is at this time. So many people come to me for relationship work. It's one of the things I think I'm becoming. I'm certainly immersed in it. I don't want to call myself an expert at it because I'm really learning. I'm like, most of my teaching is coming from direct experience, but to be connected to a
You're
lineage.
a 6th house Venus, so you're an apprentice.
Yes.
You're a relationship apprentice, and you'll become a master.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll see what my evolutionary program is, but for sure, I'm in the work, and I wouldn't be teaching anything that I'm not also steeped in and studying and practicing in my own life and in my own work. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks for sharing that. It's just really cool to hear about, and you shared a little bit about it just now. Sorry if I'm just tired and it's like really late. You shared a little bit about it right now. Tell me more about how you first discovered EA and just your journey and really uncovering it. And you mentioned the Pluto aspects. That was a pivotal time in your life.
Yeah.
Just feel free to take that wherever you want to go. I know you studied with a couple people.
Yeah. I mean, I first was introduced to evolutionary astrology through Adam Sommer. I did my apprenticeship with him, and I studied with you, several other people. I feel like it became, I got the Pluto book and the Pluto 2 book. I think I got the Pluto book in a really like obscure little bookstore in Nevada City. And just like along my travels, it followed me as something. And I never really considered myself an evolutionary astrologer because I also studied with Hellenistic astrologers, and I also studied with people from more traditional and modern astrology, and I mentored with a Vedic astrologer. And I'm a Gemini moon. I'm an amalgamation of every form, lineage, branch of astrology that you could, swirl together in a little pool. But with all that information and with all that I've gathered along, the last over a decade of studying this, more and more the Pluto work and the core callings of the soul have just constellated in the center of my practice as an astrologer. And I do think that that's largely influenced by you. We came together in a very Plutonic way. And I even remember like one of the first times I saw you wearing that t-shirt that you wear that says resistance is Plutile.
Bradley Narrigan, who is speaking at this conference, designed the shirt that says resistance is Plutile. It's a nerdy evolutionary astrology joke.
It's like the cutest thing ever. It's just so great, and obviously our work together. I supported, your essentials course and your training programs for years. And we've been like doing our evolutionary work on a soul level together for years. And the more that has I mean, that's essentially the heartbeat of my life. Where else is it? You know, so you and me and this work and these teachings and this lineage has transformed who I am. And I don't even know who I'm becoming on some level. That is the best part, but it's certainly like such a place of gratitude for me, even in how incredibly challenging evolution has been for me at times. I think I'm a soul that definitely gravitates towards strength training in resistance. But maybe in the second half of my life, I'll strengthen in my cooperation. So,
thanks for sharing all that. So I want to share with everyone. Yeah, Michelle's pretty much like a central not spoke but hub, the center, the hub, the center part. Yeah. Of this whole conference, the entire Evolutionary Astrology Association. So Michelle is the admin, and then everything else,
the webmaster,
the financial
technical
person,
support.
And this whole thing happened. You were going to teach a Pluto series last year with consideration to, you know, the big 2023 Pluto square in the nodes, and I was like, shouldn't I be teaching that? Shouldn't that be an evolutionary? You know, because we're all about Pluto and we're all about the nodes and Pluto square in the nodes. Like, I should do that, right? And that opened up to a conversation around, you know, this becoming a series. I'll reach out to Kristen and some colleagues, and just through a natural unfolding, we've created this EA association. And it's just been really neat to also watch you not just admin it, but also go deeper into the work. And I'm really excited for your talk. I really am. And it's like, this is also a community that's been a part of my life for a long time. You know, we all have our little, you know, communities, right? But the EA people, like, they're family, one of my families, you know?
Yeah.
And you're my family. And it's like this like weaving and this unification that's like really healing, really integrative. So, but yeah, I just want everyone to know that, you know, Michelle is the head inker for this whole thing. It's a lot of work. And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this.
Well, I love it too, because, you know, I brought forth my idea, this emergence inside of me, and together we, you know, expanded upon that. And then we brought in community of EA astrologers who I absolutely love and adore, and created a way of sharing. And, you know, Deva and Rose and Kristen and Rob and, you know, like everyone shared some of the teaching for our association series. It was really so much a relational and collaborative effort. And it really brought together a whole community of people and created something that was beyond what was just my initial impulse, right? And then the space, you know, I created this beautiful website, and the space was created for a forum, which has really continued the legacy of the message board on the School of EA.
The old message board, the Evolutionary Astrology, which is like where I, if the message board was like an ashram, like that's where I spent several years, you know what I'm saying? That. And so it's crazy, just like, here we are. And now you are taking this, it's literally like Michelle has rebuilt the ashram that I used to live in, you know, like that's what to like a more modern facility. made by Wix, not WordPress. And it's just so trippy, you know?
Yeah. And then,
and it's a great service to the community too, just like making it, there's a renewal, and part of the intention of the association is to really make the teachings sort of more accessible and available to the masses, and kind of bring it into the year 2023 in that sense,
Well, and one of the things that I love is that you were a part of one of the original EA conferences that actually happened in a physical location.
You want to tell the story of that physical location?
Oh, you should, I think.
So the EA conference, I think there were conferences many years ago, but the more recent of them was in 2011 and 2012. And that was cool. I mean, that was, when I met many of my colleagues and teachers that I've studied with or learned from on the message board for many years. This was at a conference center called Still Meadow near Portland, Oregon. Okay. Years later, Michelle and I make a family. We're visiting a dear brother of mine who lives on this land that was recently bought. It used to be a retreat center. And we get there and we realize it's
the same place.
So my friend, and it's just this woman, a meditator, bought this land. It's like a very peaceful, they have some retreats there. It's a very low-key place right now. And he's sort of been helping out as like a caretaker. And so as a family, we've visited there a couple times, just to visit. So it's just really interesting how things come full circle in that way.
And in this online conference that we're organizing, most of the conference presenters, not all of them, we have some new evolutionary astrologers who, but most of them were actually at that original conference that you were talking about. And we even had a photograph of everyone sitting together. So I just feel we never know from an evolutionary perspective in our journey where we're going to be taken, where we're going to go, what things are going to circle around, what relationships are going to come back, and how things are going to evolve. Who knows? Maybe this online conference will again become an in-person conference. I love organizing conferences and retreats, and I'm delighted to bring everyone together in the way that we are now, in the spirit of wow, we get to be together with 14 amazing EA astrologers. Everyone picked topics that they were clearly called to teach, and I'm a part of that. We're this sort of host family, Ari and I, with Kristen, and just delighted to really kick this weekend off, which is really just a beginning of things.
Wonderful. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing this interview and conversation with me. This was a delight. Thank you all for watching. Thank you. Once again, check it out. It's in the description below. The Evolutionary Astrology Online Conference. It's coming up October 6th through 8th. Hope to see you there.